right.
Well, we'll get started and we can let any late stragglers come in. So welcome to Does Your Content Spark Joy? A Guide to Content Audits. I will say Zach created that name, so he gets 100% of the credit because I've gotten lots of feedback already on how our title was so great. I'm like, that was Zach. I'm really good at coming up with cheesy titles, and Zach is good at actually finessing them. So thank you, Zach.
You're so welcome.
And we are both on the Yale Sites team. We have worked on a lot of content strategy projects. And we've done a few content audits, and they're really fun. So I think we've learned a lot of best practices throughout our experiences in working on the content audits. We've messed up a lot, so we're going to share all of our findings, and hopefully we can share some of that with you and give you some tools and resources to do your own content audits in the future.
For sure. I think it's interesting that we're sort of coming off of a sort of interesting cultural interest in tidying. So we're finding that there's a lot of overlap with problems that people encounter in their website governance, in their content governance, and just decluttering a house. So we kind of wanted to explore those two things together.
Yeah, I think the idea of the Spark Joy thing kind of came up on our team a year or so ago as sort of a joke.
We used to crack jokes about it all the time.
But if you Google content audit and Spark Joy, there's a lot of articles out there about it. So we're not the only ones thinking about it.
But I never Googled it, so it's my original idea, actually.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, so today we're going to just introduce what a content audit is, and then introduce what it means to spark joy, and then tying these two together on how can your content spark joy. And then we'll talk about when and why you should do a content audit, how to actually do one, and then how to tie it together, which the analysis portion is a little bit short, and there's probably more to it than we're actually covering. So if you want to get a little bit deeper into that, we can always connect with you outside of this presentation. All right, so what is a content audit? This is a quote from Christina Halverson. So she says, an accounting of all currently published web content with all the details recorded in a spreadsheet. It's kind of a boring quote because content audits are kind of boring.
They're inherently boring.
Yeah, they're pretty boring. But she's kind of the queen of content strategy. She has a lot of, this is probably her most famous book, but she has a cool company as well, so I'd recommend checking her work out if you're interested.
What's the company called?
Brain Traffic. They're in Minneapolis, and they host a cool conference every year called Confab.
And she went.
Brain Track, did you say?
What'd you say?
Brain Track is the name?
Brain Traffic. Yeah, they have cool blogs and stuff like that you can follow. And then getting into a content inventory. So content audit is more of the action we take on a website, and an inventory is more of the tool you use to actually perform an audit. So it's basically just a spreadsheet, and it captures a lot of different information, such as page title or URL. For each page of content module, you're responsible for creating, reviewing, or caring for. And what you're actually assessing your content against can vary a lot depending on your content goals or kind of what your website needs are. So we'll get into more of that in a little bit. And then what is a content audit really? So performing a content audit has been called tedious, boring, and intimidating, time-consuming, and chaotic. So that's just from Wikipedia, which isn't a super great source, but we saw that.
That's as close to objective as they could get it.
And this is one of those activities that when you started, it's kind of cool and kind of fun, and then an hour in, you're ready to pull your hair out because it is tedious and boring, but sometimes it can also just bend your mind in weird ways. So it's good if you have a group of people to do this, or you can just do a little bit at a time, which we'll get into.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the KonMari method of tidying and what it means for something to spark joy. The KonMari method of tidying is a tidying methodology that, unlike other tidying methodologies where you're tidying sort of each room in a house one by one, or you're going through your closet and then you're going through your drawers, you do it by category of items. And this was the basis for a series of very popular tidying books and a Netflix series called Tidying Up with Marie Kondo. A quote from the KonMari method website that sort of summarizes the ethos of this tidying method is to keep only those things that speak to the heart and discard items that no longer spark joy. Thank them for their service and then let them go. And we included a tweet here. Did you know that there's an anti-Marie Kondo who constantly sends you stuff despite you having no place to store it? Did you know that it's my mom?
Yeah.
I think we all have a person in our personal and professional lives who does this with our personal belongings and also with our website content.
I should send this to my mom after this, actually, maybe. Direct her to this page.
We all have a website mom that constantly gives us bad or useless content that needs to be put up on the website. So what does it mean for something to spark joy? It's a little hard to describe concretely, but it's something that you know when you feel it, when you're dealing with that object. Basically, if that object or possession, if it excites you, if it makes you happy, if it inspires any positive regard, if you feel fondness for it, that's what it means when something sparks joy.
All right, so how can content spark joy? So it's kind of like a content audit is kind of similar to decluttering your living space, and for a couple of reasons. So in the KonMari method, you'll, for example, pile like all of your clothes in one place so you can see them all at once. So even if you have some clothes like under the bed, some in the closet, some in your other closet, you just get them all and put them together so you can see how much crap you actually have.
And it's always too much.
It's always too much, and that's very similar with an audit. So you pull every single piece of content, every web page, all into a spreadsheet so you can just look and see how much is there. You don't necessarily have to audit all of that, but it's good to like get a sense of how much actually lives on your website, and usually it's pretty mind-boggling. So content, how can content spark joy? So Zach and I came up with a couple of like descriptive words to help with this that I think we wanted them to be like as applicable as possible to the majority of people working with web content in some way. So if the content is clear, is the content meaningful? So it serves a purpose. Is it purposeful? And is it valuable? So those are kind of the four things that we came up with that were like general enough. Content obviously can be a lot of other different descriptive words. But yeah. Ooh. Okay. And this is just another tweet that we thought was funny. So this guy Lewis says, I'm not kidding, there should be a Marie Kondo-like show about how people can have conversations in groups. Do we need that long-winded anecdote? Could it have been one sentence? Have we repeated that joke before? Let's cut that story into thirds. So it kind of relates to written content as well, but you probably...
And we do our writing for the web training, so it's very relevant to us in particular.
You probably all know somebody who just, talks for 5 minutes and they could have said the same thing in 10 seconds. So kind of the same idea. We tend to use more words than are necessary. All right. So getting back to how content can spark joy. So your content should clearly support your communication and organizational goals on your website. And that can be a big thing to determine what that is if you don't have that already. So that should be included by all stakeholders of the website, decision makers, the people who are actually doing the work on the website, kind of determining what those goals are and having them written out somewhere is helpful. And then the content should serve the user. So sometimes serving the user is different and kind of goes against supporting the communication and organizational goals of your website. Depends who you ask, but I say serving the user should probably trump that, just because the website is not for you, it's for your audience.
And that can suggest a disconnect between your organizational and communication goals and the needs of the people that are actually using your website, so that could maybe guide you towards reworking those as well.
And then the content should serve a purpose and it shouldn't add any clutter to the website. So there's a lot of thought that goes into what you're creating, why you're creating it, and who it's for before you actually post it. Let's see it in action. Okay, so yesterday, did anyone go to Amber Gerard's presentation? Okay, if you didn't go to it, I recommend looking at or watching her video after the conference, after we get the videos up, which hopefully isn't too long. But she works at Yale Sustainability, and she was kind of in charge with leading the redesign of their website. So she goes into it in a lot more detail. We'll just open that up. So basically, we worked alongside Amber for probably like a year, and revamping their website, and they did a complete like overhaul of their content. So not necessarily all website redesigns include the content, which is unfortunate, but hers did. It was like the focus point of it. They really made important content more prominent on the website, and then they also reduced content as well. They had so many like repetitive words and content, like similar types of content in different places. So we got rid of a lot of that.
And a lot of the content was rewritten as well.
Yeah.
And we worked directly with Amber to rewrite a lot of that content.
Yeah. So basically, these are their 9, are these the goals?
Ambition areas.
Ambitions, sorry. Get a little bit. So these are their 9 ambitions, and then these are all broken up further. So if you want to read about stewardship, you can kind of just get a brief overview of what stewardship is, what Yale's doing about it, what you can do about it. So I bring this page up because it's actually pretty long in terms of the content on it. So, but they break it up in a really nice way so that she's using a lot of bullet points, descriptive text. We condense the language and really all of these sentences. And then, if you want to get more in the weeds, you can keep scrolling and reading more. If not, you can get a good sense for what stewardship at Yale is, within about 10 seconds.
Right.
So.
And a lot of these things that are headers and bullets and all of these other things, a lot of them were previously broken out across multiple pages that went multiple levels deeper into the navigation. A lot of the information on this page was previously only available in PDF documents. So just kind of condensing content in a way that made sense and sort of made it easier for users to access the content that they were looking for and make that content easier to consume.
And then the other example is FAS, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences website, which I don't think we actually did a content audit with them. I think that was before we were really kind of baking that into the work that we did.
I don't know. I think we did.
We did?
I think we did.
See, it was like too much. I just can't remember. What'd you say? Let's go with yes.
Let's play in this fiction.
But they have, so basically the Faculty of Arts and Sciences has this thing called FastTap 2007 and 2016. And like all of this FastTap information was really...
It's the tenure and approval process documents.
It's very important. It's like central to, Moira's shaking her head because she uses it. And it's very central to a lot of people who are using the website. They're looking for that information, and it was like really hidden before. And
in like PDF documents.
Yeah,
again.
I think we had a couple of working sessions before that we found this PDF document. They're like, oh yeah, we like print this off at every single meeting.
They called it their placemat.
Oh, okay.
Because it was such a huge document.
I think it is. I think it might be this thing. Yeah, this is their placemat. And I think before it took like a long time to get to the placemat.
And it still exists in this PDF format, but we converted it into a format that made more sense to access as like a person reading a website, and also in a way that made it easier to find in the website itself.
So, I'll get back here. Okay.
So when is it appropriate to do a content on it? When should you do it? Many people, this is a quote again from Christina Halverson, many people only think of audits when they're redesigning or migrating a website, but audits are valuable at any time during the life of your content. Obviously, this depends on the size of a website and your resource capacity and sort of whatever other things you have going on within your organization, but performing a content audit only when there's some sort of major website upheaval, whether it's, you're remaking a website or, you find that the website is, performing very badly for whatever reason, or if there's some leadership shift. There are plenty of other times when it's appropriate to do a content audit. It can make sense to get into a habit of just performing a content audit every couple of years, less frequently than you would do a major website redesign, but just to make sure that your content goals are on the right track, that the content is achieving the purpose that it's supposed to achieve, that it's meeting your organizational and communication goals. And if not, that gives you a chance to sort of change course and rethink what you're doing and change your direction before it becomes a full-on crisis.
Yeah, and I think alongside that, you don't necessarily have to audit everything at once, and we'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about methodology. But you can do like just a certain section of your website, so it can kind of be more of an ongoing thing rather than this like huge ordeal of doing everything at once. All right, why do we do a content audit? There are lots of reasons to do a content audit, and they probably really depend on your specific website and organization. But it does help to define the scope and the direction of the work that needs to be done. So you're kind of able to like clearly see sort of what areas of your website are going to need more work than others, and maybe you can prioritize based off of that. It can improve the clarity of your content goals. So maybe you have some content goals already, and then after performing your content audit, maybe they don't super align with that and they need to be updated. Obviously it improves the content quality. We're not getting too much into like writing today, but even just by like reducing the amount of content, that is a big step of improving the quality. And it can help you to determine an action for each piece of content. So that's kind of a key piece of a content audit, which we'll show you. So maybe you would want to remove a piece of content entirely. Maybe it just needs slight revision. Maybe nothing really needs to be done to it. Or maybe it needs to sort of be consolidated with some other part of the website, which is kind of, we did a lot of consolidation with sustainability because it was very similar messages repeated over and over. So yeah, there's a lot of consolidation with that, and that can help with the cleanup quite a bit. So we also do content audits to make sense of content performance. So that can be related sort of to your website's analytics and understanding. I mean, first of all, you can understand if a page has a lot of hits, that maybe you can start focusing on that content more. Or maybe you find a page that like doesn't really have that many hits, but you think it should because it's really important. Then maybe you need to look at the placement of that content on the website to make sure it is getting the viewership that it deserves. And it helps you prioritize content, kind of already mentioned that. And then it helps you to create a foundation for better future content. So, I mean, I think you can kind of think about that when you're decluttering like your closet, and then it's like 2 years go by and it's like I'm in the same mess again. So it's kind of the same thing with content. Like we start just slowly collecting things over time, but kind of doing that full audit and sort of resetting can help you be a little bit more thoughtful of content that you create in the future.
Or maybe it just makes room for other better things that are more worthy of your resources.
And it helps inform better editorial decisions. Probably not going to touch on this too much, and this is a whole different topic of conversation, but this kind of relates to your content workflow, kind of
governance.
Like, who's touching the content and when, and is that leading to content issues? So it can help kind of bring to light some of those current content editorial decisions that might not be supporting your website in the best way.
All right, good. So we're gonna talk about the actual content audit processes. So this is when you're actually starting to tidy up the website. So the first step in this process is going to be actually creating your content inventory. And there are a variety of different ways that you can do this. A couple of tools that we have used in the past and know work. Site Improve is a big one. Sarah Lynch from the accessibility team did a presentation on this earlier today. I don't know if any of you attended, but it is a very helpful tool. Yale has a Site Improve account and can make it available to websites, and this also includes website analytics.
Yeah, so I would honestly recommend that one just because, like, we did that in our last audit, and it just really made it a lot easier to actually set up the audit. Before we would have to like use one of these other tools, and it would get all the page URLs, but some of them might be, it would, like, some are capped at like 500 pages, and then you'd have to like match it to the analytics, and it's a whole big thing. So
page limits, not the same depth of information either, harder to parse. So yeah, Screaming Frog and Site Spider are both free, and you can access those if for whatever reason Site Improve is not an option. And then it is helpful to break it down by category. So in a content audit, it's helpful to break things down. Actually, we have this backwards.
We clearly didn't do
the animations right.
The animation correct on the slide. Forgive us.
So in the KonMari method, you organize your items by category and you put them into a big pile essentially, and then you assess these items one by one. So it might be that you start with clothes. In this process, you always start with clothes. Then you do books, then you do papers, then miscellaneous items, then finally sentimental items. So in a content audit, there's no set order necessarily. And there's no way necessarily that's the right way to perform an audit, breaking it down. But some ways that can be helpful are breaking it down by content type, if you're using a content management system that uses a content type structure. Breaking it down by where they sit in the navigation menu, looking at imagery and videos specifically, or pages containing imagery and videos, looking exclusively at landing pages, or breaking it down by who you consider the audiences for those pages to be.
Which might be a little harder to figure that out.
A little bit more intensive, requires more work on your part.
It should be fairly obvious of like how you should break it down by. So usually content type and navigation menu are like kind of the main ways, but you could have a different purpose for your content audit.
Yeah. And then the next step is taking that inventory and actually trimming it down to whatever's relevant for the purposes of your content audit. So doing a full site content audit, assessing every piece of content on your website, frankly, isn't going to be an option for everybody, especially depending on the size of your website and the resources available to you within your organization. Especially because doing something like this is often something that you're going to have to make an argument for, and that argument might not always be a super winning argument. But you can select certain content types that you're paying attention to and remove ones that aren't relevant, or you can say, we don't want to touch this section of the site because we think this content for our intents and purposes is solid right now, or
it's just not high priority.
Yeah.
And certain content might not need to be touched that much. So like news items, I mean, you're probably not going to go back and rewrite a journalist's
news items and events and things like that are mostly archival, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to go back and revisit that content because frankly, not a lot of people are going to be going back into your website to look at those things anyway, except for sort of as an item of record.
I think this is a fun exercise because it's like, ooh, I started with 1,500 pages and I got it down to 400. Yay!
Yeah.
400 is still a lot to audit, but it's better than 1,500.
Right. Let's see.
Awesome. So when you're actually doing the content audit, we look at a few different criteria to judge each content against. So some of them are more quantitative in nature, which don't really like that word, but that's kind of the standard for
It's just the data.
the data. So that includes
hard
things
facts.
like page name, page URL, page level, analytics, content type, PDFs, forms, videos, etc. Some of these can be gathered like automatically. So like with Site Improve, the last time we used that, we got page name, page URL, and analytics.
And page level. We had page level.
We had
too.
page level too?
Yeah,
Did
yeah.
we just not use that?
We used it to organize the audit, and then we deleted it from the final audit.
Yeah. So for the most recent audit we did, we didn't really necessarily need to know the page level that much, but sometimes it could be helpful. And yeah, we'll let you know of like PDFs, forms, that sort of thing on your website. So maybe you want to do like a PDF revamp. You could do an audit just on PDFs. Yes, it does. Qualitative is a little bit more time-consuming part of the audit. So this allows you to dive a lot deeper into the content. So qualitative is more of like the meaning behind the content. So we'll get into some of those criteria. So we came up with a list of criteria that we'll get into, and then basically you assess each content item against those criteria on a scale of 1 to 5. You don't have to do that.
That's just our scale.
Yeah, that's what we did on in our most recent content audit as a way to make the analysis a lot quicker and easier. I think before that, like our criteria was more of like based off of words, but it's harder to like quickly analyze the words other than like reading every single thing, which if you have like 400 lines of it, it takes a long time.
Yeah. Giving it a numerical value allowed us to quickly like calculate things, which was helpful for the analysis.
So just keeping in mind, is this content sparking joy for your users and your organization? So here's some of the content criteria that's taken from a number of different sources. So all definitely like content audit strategy books and articles from like good sources, and ones that we thought would be helpful that maybe you would want to use. So usable, readable, accurate, findable, consistent, clear, professional, user-friendly, accessible, and sustainable. So for example, if you are looking at professional, you would look at a piece of content and say, from a scale of 1 to 5, how professional is this content? However, we all kind of interpret content differently. Some people judge it more harshly than others. Some are like, yeah, it's fine. It looks good to me. So it's really helpful to have a checklist for each of these criteria. So that means like if you have a couple of different people working on an audit, they can all refer to the same checklist, and that will help with consistency across judging. And there is still going to be differences, so just be aware of that, and that's fine if that happens. So you want to determine which criteria are applicable to your content. So that list I just showed, I wouldn't recommend using all of those because that would take a long time.
That'd
So
be a meaty
I think
audit.
the most recent audit we selected 4. Just based off of the goals that we had already identified with that project. And then it's good for you to obtain group consensus on the meaning of the criteria, which we had mentioned. So this is really only if you're doing an audit with a group.
Which ideally you should be, divide and conquer.
Yeah, because you don't want to do that yourself. Maybe there's some people out there that maybe are into it, but I would say probably not that many are. So yeah, kind of already said that. It's always good when I can make Javon laugh. I don't know if that was me though. So basically creating the checklist will allow you to be a bit more consistent over time. Because when you start with a content audit, you'll start off like with a lot of enthusiasm and excitement. And then as you keep going on, it's just like everything blurs together. Your eyes are like getting kind of all over the place.
Your brain melts.
Yeah, so it's
You're
like
falling asleep.
It gets a little bit, it can change over time. Which, take lots of breaks.
Yeah.
So this is just an example of a content criteria checklist for one of those criteria. So for this one, is the content clear? And this was something Zach and I just like literally copied and pasted from a recent audit that we did. So for us, I mean, again, we looked at different research and things like that to come up with this checklist. But for clear, we mean, is the content written in active voice? Are the headings in the link text descriptive? And is the language easy to understand? So simple language over overly complex language. So that way, everyone who's doing the audit will be looking at this checklist when they're looking for clarity. And then when you're actually completing the audit, you kind of go through all of these like criteria items, and then at the end of that, you can assess and assign an action area to each content item. So these are some of the most common actions to assign to a content. There could be more or different ones.
And these are also the ones that we used in our recent audit.
Yeah, so we have major revisions. That means like a total overhaul of the content. Like you maybe even have to like start it from scratch. Minor revisions means like the content on the page is like pretty good, but it could be improved for just like better web rating.
Yeah, maybe reformat it or maybe like tweak a couple of sections of it here and there.
Removing, this is an exciting one. Definitely try to remove a lot of content. You know, you're going through this like long, arduous process to improve your website content, so kind of look and see what actually doesn't need to be there. And the same thing with consolidating. So I think consolidating is also a great way to kind of declutter the content on your website. Migrating would be really not doing anything with it. So sometimes, depending on what that is, that might make sense. Or you can just use our template. So Zach and I created a template. This is just a sample. So I would recommend if you are doing a content audit, like, you know, consider all of the factors, all of your goals, what makes sense for you. Yeah, so we have some instructions. I don't know where my mouse is. There it is. So this includes all the content criteria, or some of them, and their checklists. The most recent audit we did, we actually did a photography audit as well. So we're not really touching on that too much, but we have this criteria for photography and imagery. This was created by our designer, so you can trust it. And then here is the actual sample audit. So
it's a big spreadsheet, as you can see.
Really big, exciting spreadsheet. So this
we all love
one
spreadsheets.
Is the this is the title of the page, the URL of the page. This is analytics. So this is page views for the last 30 days, which I believe Site Improve gives you.
Yep.
And can you adjust that?
I don't know, Mike.
Site Improve gives you analytics if it's a Yale site.
Okay.
Okay.
If it's not hosted in a Yale site, you have to deploy the analytics
Okay.
script to the site.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So if it's a Yale site, you can get analytics.
Yeah. And then here we have all of these content criteria that we were talking about. So is the content clear? Is it concise? And then rating it on a scale of 1 to 5. So I have a little note here. 1 would be unclear, and then 5 would be very clear. So you can kind of rate the content based off of that scale.
And you can change this criteria to whatever you want.
Yep. Here's some stuff about imagery. And basically we're filling all this in until we get to the content action. So this is kind of like the major point of the content audit is like, okay, now I've looked at it, what do we do with it?
Right.
And then you select, you know, whatever it needs to go in. And then I do recommend having a notes section because when you're like going through all the content like line by line, you might come up with a really good idea or be like, maybe we should consolidate it with this page or this is what I'm thinking. But like you're gonna forget all of that as soon as you close out of this.
It's not very helpful to you if you mark that something needs major revisions and then you don't say why or what.
Yeah, so you don't have to include notes for every single one, but it can be really helpful to jot down any things that are popping up as you're going through it. Yeah, so that's it.
Yeah.
Can't
Almost.
really see very well.
Okay.
Or if you don't want to do this at all, you could work with our team and we could help you do it.
And there's the plug.
There you go. It's probably the most salesy thing I've ever done at Yale.
Wow. All right. So now we can talk about, you have all this information. What does it all mean? How do we analyze it? Finding out what the data is actually telling you. So how many items fall within a given category? How many pieces of content need major revisions? How many pieces of content can we remove outright? And then how does the content stack against your criteria? So like, what portion of your content is meeting the goals that you're setting? Like, our content should be such and such number on our self-assigned usability scale, or our content should be this clear. So a sample analysis that we just threw some like fake data together. Say that you have 100 total pages that you've audited. Maybe 32% of your pages need major revisions. That'd be pretty bad. But only 28% need minor revisions. 5% of your content you can keep as is. That seems a little low. 15% of your content could be consolidated, and then 20%, a fifth of your content could be unpublished. So depending on the breadth of the amount of content on your website, removing a fifth of your content might seem absolutely insane, or it might seem actually pretty reasonable.
Yeah, just one more thing. Like, so with this example, the analysis can help you like kind of nail down what you should focus on first. So if like you're a very small team and you can't revise like over 50% of the content, you could maybe say like, okay, well, I'll focus on major revisions, the content in major revisions, and then I'll focus on only content that falls within like a certain analytic range. So you're kind of narrowing the number of pages that you need to focus on first down. So that can be a really helpful tool for the audit, and then you can always go back to your audit at a later point in time. You're like, okay, now I'm ready to work on something else. I'll get to the pages that need minor revisions.
Right. Continuing from that, if you were evaluating your content based on the data for your content criteria, is your content clear? You might have unclear content that you've determined had a 1 through a 3 on your scale of clarity. 60% of that content falls within that range and is unclear. But that means 40% of your content is clear. Or is the content concise? If you have a lot of content that's not concise and a small amount of content that is concise, then you have a clear path to revising that content to make it more concise. Content that is not clear or concise does not spark joy, in our opinion.
And you can probably just think to your own experiences on website when you like open a website and there's so much on it and you get really overwhelmed. Sometimes like now I feel like I just exit out of it. Sometimes I scream a little bit. It is overwhelming. So like website clutter is definitely a real thing, and I think more people are paying attention to it now. Like we've had this huge boom with websites in general, and now we're starting to clean them up and be a little bit more thoughtful with them.
So looking beyond the actual data that you get from the report, just not basing everything on the qualitative analysis or the quantitative analysis of the data that you've put into the analytics, you should make sure that you go back through all of your comments and notes. You should just kind of look within those notes, look for any patterns. The same thing keeps coming up in the notes over and over again. Anything that's an obvious potential challenge, the things that are going to suggest massive, redevelopment efforts or massive rewriting content efforts or changes in how your content is governed, or any problems. We need to change this content, but this content has dependencies and that's going to cause other problems. So that can be helpful. And it helps you look for content that actually needs to be prioritized because you don't have an infinite amount of resources with which to make changes to your content. And you can look for easy wins. Easy wins are removing content a lot of the time or making minor edits to pages. Or sometimes it can be consolidating pages, taking them and just uniting them under a single page or a single section of the navigation.
one more.
Yeah, so just remember that you don't actually need to audit all of your content at once. A lot of the times that's just not going to be feasible, so you should focus on areas that you think will need the most attention, or areas of your site that are maybe more important to your organization or more important to your users. You should try to have alignment on your organizational and content goals, because otherwise those things are going to be in constant conflict with each other, and you're going to keep running into problems on both ends.
And that might not always be achievable, so it's
Yeah.
okay if that doesn't happen.
And just try to always keep your user in mind when you're making changes to your content. Make sure that the changes that you're making are in service of the user, that they're going to make the user's life easier, and that they're not going to cause them any new problems. And I know that this is hard, but try not to hoard your content. Letting go of content can be very difficult because someone worked hard on it at some point. But it's important to recognize when something has done its job and is no longer needed. Try to let your content spark joy for your users as well. So last, I'm just going to talk briefly about letting go of your content, because I know that it's difficult. When a possession of yours no longer sparks joy, the KonMari method tells you that you're supposed to take a moment to appreciate the joy it once gave you before letting it go. If you have a shirt that you hate and you want to get rid of, you still thank the shirt for telling you, I don't like to wear shirts like this. So you should do the same for your content before you discard it. That content might not spark joy for you now, but it did once for somebody. So try to think about what value it had when it had value, and what lessons that piece of content can grant you about creating new, better content. And then you can sort of convert that content's value that it no longer has and recycle it into new, better content. So that is the end of our presentation. We have time for questions if anybody has any. We'll be up here for a few minutes.
We have an archive of news items going back several years.
Sorry.
Is that good or bad?
Good question. How much is like several? Like 20 or?
Probably back to like 2010 maybe?
I think that's true of a lot of websites, because there's no real reason to prune news content. Having more news content doesn't really hinder users in any way. It's there if they need it, and it's not having any negative impact on your website. So I don't think that's a problem.
I know when we redid the Beinecke website, we got rid of, was it events, Javon? We got rid of, I think it was events from a certain year, but they had events from the early 2000s, so we got rid of a bunch of those. So it wasn't really adding anything. So I don't think it's necessary, but.
There was another class we went to that said that the links on the Drupal sites actually only last 2 years.
Well, not if you can adjust that though,
Yeah.
to add, you change the year, talking about the archive.
Like the links within the news articles probably won't
Well,
be
the
as good.
default I think is 3 years, but you can set it to go back 10 or maybe further.
Okay, yeah, that's, okay.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that
I
before.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good to know.
Any other questions? Yes?
Do you recommend setting up 404 redirects from if you're getting rid of a bunch of content, should you redirect those old pages to something?
Yeah, in general, yes, because a lot of the times when you go through a major website redesign or when you delete a lot of content, you're going to start getting a lot of 404s from people who might have had that content bookmarked or are reaching that content via links from other, especially within Yale organizations. A lot of sites are going to be interlinking to each other, so it's good to either set up 404s to new pages where that content lives, or at the very least redirect them to the closest analog to a section on the website, just so that people aren't hitting that 404 page and then getting confused. Yes?
Is there any kind of software that you run that will identify links that are broken?
Yes. The Site Improve does that. Site Improve has
Site Improve does everything.
Yeah, Site Improve is a wonder
I think
product.
Drupal does it too, but I think Site Improve is better.
I think Site Improve is much more reliable for checking broken links. I've used that feature and it's been pretty easy to use. It'll tell you which pages contain broken links, and then you can view which links on that page are broken. So that's pretty helpful. All right.
Well, if anyone is ever working on a content audit or has content questions, feel free. Oh, yeah.
So it sounds like the content audits are very valuable for when you have a website and it's been up and running for a while. Do you suggest doing something like this or similar for when a site is actually being built?
I think it's good to consider a lot of the to be
Ideas?
thinking that way,
Yeah.
but not necessarily to produce like the artifact of the audit itself.
I mean, if you don't have existing content, then you can't really do this, but it's good to be like thinking in your head like what your strategy is for producing that content, kind of what your brand is, your tone and voice, like what all that stuff is. So it's good to have like a pretty solid understanding, and then you can create a content plan to hopefully avoid having to do like a lot of this in the future.
Right, because if you think about this before you create the content, you save yourself a lot of headache later.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is your template that you shared accessible someplace?
Yeah. So right now it's just on like Google Sheets. So if you have like a Gmail account, we can share it with you by that, or we can convert it to like an Excel.
And we're also distributing the slides.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to access it from
Yeah.
there. Also, all the tools that we mentioned in there.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
if you want it before we actually get the slides up, you can just email us because it
Yeah.
will probably take us probably a couple of weeks to get all that information up. What'd you say?
What's your email?
I'll give it to, mine's hard to spell.
It's our names, so our names on the schedule, just first name dot last name at yale.edu.
It's our names.
Yeah.
Very nice. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for coming.